قسما بالله رب العالمين ما ارتضينا غير دين الله دين فهو دين الحق دين الأنبياء إنه الإسلام نور وضياء
هذا الدر وهذه الكلم بمديح الهادي تنتظم ضاءت بالمختار الظلم وحلا في مولده النغم.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah and welcome to Finding Me on the ITV networks. Today with a very special guest. I'm truly honored. We've had some interesting encounters, and I think perhaps the best part of it was that Justice van der Westhuizen was a colleague of mine, so I had the wonderful opportunity to learn much from him and to learn how the law operates, but most importantly, how legal people sit and listen. And I've always spoken about the concept of listening on the show. And I think it is incredible to watch and to observe how a judge listens. Justice Johan van der Westhuizen is a former Concord judge. He was also appointed to the High Court by President Nelson Mandela, to the Constitutional Court by President Thabo Mbeki, and has always been or played an influential role in the academia, and that was where I was fortunate enough to meet up with him. I think it's truly an honor to have people of such a caliber with us, amongst us, and it is important for us to learn from them. So with that, I'd like to say thank you, Judge. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you.
Can I call you Johan? Is that okay?
Of course you can, yes.
Johan?
If I may call you Quraysha.
Yes, you can, certainly. Johan, you have had a very colorful history. I mean, you've done a lot of work in terms of championing human rights, especially in South Africa. I see that you also acted in council on human rights litigation, specifically to try appeals against the censorship of socially and politically significant films like Roots, Cry Freedom and A Dry White Season. And then subsequent to that, you've been part of litigation that is very important to South Africa, especially with regards to the land question. So much has happened in terms of the legal sphere in South Africa. Let's start right at the start. When you became a lawyer, you studied law, you became a lawyer and then moved up. What drove you towards this particular profession?
Well, firstly, you said I'm a colorful person. I think the main color I have is not white but pink. That is something that Steve Biko said in court, by the way, when a magistrate said, "Why do you call yourself black? You're more brown than black." He said, "But you're actually more pink than white." So we are many different shades of people in South Africa. From pink, some call themselves white. In between, there are 50 shades of brown. And then we call some people black. Yeah, it was almost by coincidence that I studied law. But the early influences on my life, my mother was a very conservative person whose main concern was that one should stay out of trouble. So whenever I started to dabble with human rights, and she said, "You'll go to jail and stay out of that trouble." My father was very inconsistent. He worked for the government. He actually wrote apartheid propaganda, but he also was a poet and wrote many novels and short stories. So in his off time, he influenced me quite a lot to see human rights abuses. Small things like how the police would kick people around and throw them into a police wagon, etc. There were small incidents from early childhood. So when I studied law, I became more and more attracted to the concept of justice, which might have many different meanings, religious and otherwise. But fairness, equality, etc. I was less attracted to the commercial subjects, although I did quite well in them. But I was less attracted to the commercial subjects than to things like criminal law. Those days we did not even have proper constitutional law. There was no course in human rights. So I gradually started to become involved with human rights issues. I did not have a Damascus moment. I didn't learn that we are all equal while I was in Germany. But what going to other countries meant to me is that I got more courage to speak out here. So at the University of Pretoria, where I was teaching legal philosophy, a course that I designed myself, I brought a lot of critical things into it, like criticizing apartheid legislation, dismantling it, asking the students why is it necessary.
So this was happening at the time that we were still very much in apartheid state, right?
Yes, that was happening.
And at the University of Pretoria?
Yes, I started teaching full-time in 1976 already. So my classes were all white. The students were often the children of police generals and army generals and government ministers and so on. In 1986, we took a major decision. We had a conference on human rights, and from there we started the Center for Human Rights at the university, which still exists and which is now quite famous, especially in an African context. During that time, I made contact with activists. I was on these things are now very irrelevant these days, but I went on the so-called Dakar expedition at the time, where a group of white, mainly Afrikaans-speaking people met with the ANC in exile. And later I had a lot of contact with liberation movements, including even the PAC and so on. So then the negotiations started, and I became involved in that. During that time, yes, the censorship, most of the cases did not deal with politics. Most of the cases dealt with nudity and dirty words in movies and bikini pictures in magazines. But for us at the time, it was part and parcel of the same, perhaps draconian censorship system. A very Calvinist, Afrikaans-dominated censorship system. So it had sort of two directions. The one was just from a liberal perspective, freedom of speech in films and books. The other one was the Freedom Charter was banned, and several political publications were banned. So I participated in that also.
So I just have a question. I mean, this is a very curious time that you're at the University of Pretoria and you're taking up all of these very controversial issues. Did you not face any backlash, or wasn't there an onslaught against you, your person, from the university, from the conservative mindset within the university?
You know, one must be honest about these things. Academics, white academics, were never really seriously targeted. They like to say so. Some of them left for Canada long before they did anything. And then they would say, I knew one day I was going to write something and then I was going to get into trouble and therefore I left. Basically, they left because they were worried that black people would take over the country. But in my case, yes, once you made contact with activists like the ANC in exile, from then, not the university, but there was some trouble with security police. There were shots fired at the house, not at me. They were plaster and gone and windows out. And some of my friends were told by senior police officers that they were watching me and so on. University, interesting. The university top management, they knew where things were going to go. So they handled it in a way that in a private discussion, they would say to me, we are not supporting what you did. Make it clear that you didn't get money from the university. Make it clear, and don't, after the Dakar expedition, they said don't address meetings on campus. So we did it in houses close to campus. And then at the end, for example, the then Vice-Chancellor would say, you know, we started with initiatives in Africa. We are helping Mozambique with water purification. And one day we will know that you were one of the first to do these things. So also at embassy functions, foreign embassies, they would proudly introduce me. At the university, they want to make it clear that I don't get financial, etc. support. The center was a different story. Because that was a proper university thing. So what I learned from that is sometimes it is safer to have a high profile than to try to stay out of trouble. Because once it is known what you are doing, it is much more difficult for them to stop you.
Yeah, and that's why I remember recently when we were having that particular meeting with the students and you said, I'm a troublemaker. But then after listening to you, I realized that you're a troublemaker too.
Yeah, but I will never say that I was a serious. I suppose many people regarded me as an activist. My academic credentials were good enough that they could not say I was an activist and not an academic. But at some time, once after Dakar, a German television station wanted to go with me to the classroom because they thought the students were going to beat me up and they wanted to film it. So I said, no, we can't do that for the image of the university. In the faculty, in the law faculty, at some point a colleague started to distribute a newsletter, a weekly newsletter with cartoons ridiculing me and depicting me next to people like Cyril Ramaphosa and Bishop Tutu and so on. For them, that was still evil. So I was targeted, but I was not tortured or detained for long periods or anything like that.
But very quickly, before we go to the break, what happened to you is reminiscent of what has happened recently to some academics at the University of Pretoria, and especially in the same department that you were in. I mean, for speaking out, for supporting Fees Must Fall, for supporting the agenda of transformation. Also, somebody in the Faculty of Law wrote some nasty things about this particular academic. So has the minds, quickly, has the mindset changed? Has there been a shift in the mindset, or is there still, very much a continuation of the past
that
process?
is an important but difficult question. When I came back to the university in a temporary capacity, part-time now, after my time expired on the Constitutional Court, at first I was very impressed with the size, how the people's level of specialization, all of these things that in academic life, publications, etc., are much more complex than it used to be in my time, much more technical. So on many levels, in many ways, on a much higher level. But I did gradually become quite disappointed with the mindset of some people. And you get different categories. People are not that simple to categorize. I don't easily call somebody a racist. But you get people who are against the whole new dispensation, meaning our more than 20-year-old democracy. I know there's questions about the very concept. You get people who accept it sort of reluctantly. You get people who pretend that they accept it. And they would rely on the Constitution and on freedom of expression, etc., to justify rude, sometimes racist behavior. And then you get different categories until you end up on perhaps a more radical end, where people start to question the Constitution itself and the very idea of our democracy. But to some extent, it is difficult to compare because the issues, of course, have shifted. But there is still a lot of resistance to change, to opening up to new possibilities, to understand. These people won't say it openly. They won't anymore now. Like in my previous days, senior professors would arm themselves and stand guard at primary schools where their children were, out of fear for the black masses from Mamelodi would come and overrun the school. Now, of course, that you don't get anymore. But on many levels, there is still a lot of resistance to change. And together with that, a level of, quite sorry to say it, but this intellectual dishonesty.
Okay, so we have to go to a break. When we come back, I'm going to take this conversation with you a little further. We'll see you after the break.
بمديح الهادي تنتظم ضاءت بالمختار ظلم وحلا في مولده النغم بمديح الهادي تنتظم ضاءت بالمختار ظلم وحلا في مولده النغم.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and welcome to the second segment of Finding Me today on the ITV networks with a very amazing intellectual, a very colorful person, as he described himself in terms of his color, Justice van der Westhuizen. And we're talking about South Africa, the legal system, education, and just simple questions about transformation from a judicial point of view, but also from somebody who's been very much active in the entire change or transformation landscape from 1994 till present. Judge van der Westhuizen, you made a very important comment, and you said that there's intellectual dishonesty in terms of the academia. Just elaborate a little bit on that.
Yeah, of course I cannot generalize, and I do not want to be understood to insult academic. I was an academic most of my life, then a judge. And I have the advantage. Those days we were very unhappy that the judges did not want to think academically, and the judges were very unhappy that academics criticize them without knowing what happens in a court. Now, I've seen it from both sides. On the one hand, as I said, I was very impressed with the level of technology and how people specialize, etc. What disappointed me was sometimes the level of debate, intellectual debate in academic circles. People specialize so much that they are actually not interested in other fields, many of them, not all. You get some amazing people who know something about everything. But it is very disappointing when one does have the kind of things that you are interested in, a debate about transformation, in decolonization, etc., that some people are simply not interested in it. Some regard it as a threat. And then where the dishonesty come in, like I said, they would actually use the Constitution and they would use the very process of transformation and the parameters set by universities, etc., for transformation. And they would turn that around to work against transformation and decolonization. No, I'm not saying these things are easy topics. Our legal system, we cannot abolish our legal system and go back to whatever there was entirely. But we should all be open to what could enrich the system and where we could change it. And
especially if it's coming from the Faculty of Law, right?
yes, and it is an interaction in the law between academics, the judges, the people who argue the cases before the judges, and then, of course, what kind of cases people bring. I can say judges now, the judiciary has been quite transformed. I'm not talking about the way of thinking, but in terms of color, for example, the judiciary has been transformed a lot in terms of the color of judges, and especially judges in leadership positions. They are not necessarily very transformative in their thinking because the law is inherently a conservative concept. One has to refer to previous events and previous cases. Otherwise, you don't have equality before the law. I have the right today to be treated like somebody else was treated yesterday, because I might have based my decisions on...
But I want to stop you there. But then isn't that problematic? Because the society of yesterday was unequal. So how do you then continue the unequalness on the concept of a notion of equality?
Yeah, no, I don't mean in that sense at all. I simply mean on everyday. If I, in English law, they always say, if you complain to your lawyer that you were kicked by a horse, and the lawyer would say, was it a white horse or a black horse? Did he kick with the left? If I can be treated the same way as another person who was kicked by a white horse's right hand. That's what I mean on a general level. But of course, that is the essence of our situation is that the law of yesteryear was, many parts of it had nothing to do with apartheid, but it was influenced by it. Yes. Even company law and contracts and all of those things. So that is what we have to transform, but we have to do it in a way that there is still law. A judge cannot walk into court today and say, oh, let's try something new. You go to jail for 20 years, not for 5 like we normally send people, or the other way around. So there is always an element of certainty necessary, otherwise the law won't work. But together with that, we do have to work on transformation and change constantly. It is more difficult for courts to do it. It is the academics should play an important part there by what they write and what they say to influence the courts. Like I said, a judge cannot, if you sit there and Mr. X is in front of you, you cannot sentence him to twice because there was a march yesterday on the street or something. But that is where the academics must work on ways that this can be done.
So how do you change the legal culture? If, for example, within the institutions, individuals are still in positions of power that were there before and are now fighting to maintain that privilege or to maintain that position.
Yeah, it is remarkable, and that I said my first event at the university after leaving the Constitutional Court was to chair a debate on transformation. And I knew very little about the ongoing debates, but one of the things that I said is that people always say it's very difficult to get people in leadership positions, young black academics, etc. They prefer to make money. But the judiciary transformed as far as at least color is concerned. Like I said, it's a different process when it really comes to content. But every judge president, as far as I know, is black, except the Competition Court, the Supreme Court of Appeal. Constitutional Court now at the moment has only one white judge, compared to the first court that I've like 7 or 8 out of 11 were white.
So when you were in the Constitutional Court?
I was actually, the first court was appointed in President Mandela's time. Then afterwards, President Mbeki appointed a number of black judges. overseeing some prominent white candidates, and I was the first white one again appointed after the first court. When I was there, we were never more than about 3. When I left, 3. Sometimes there are acting judges coming in and out, and right now only 1. So if that is possible in the highest court, one wonders why it is not possible in the academic world. But I'm not an expert in academic administration. I can't say exactly what they must do to headhunt people or whatever. But what they must move past is a subconscious, perhaps, tendency not to take black people very seriously. And that is something that nobody would admit. Everyone would deny it. We've seen people in leadership positions like deans and so on who would respond with hands in the air and with sarcastic responses and so on. So I think it goes back to just simply taking everybody equally seriously, not to have separate little meetings of 3 or 4 people deciding important matters. But I can't say exactly what they must do. I don't want to interfere with promotion criteria and stuff like that.
So, Judge, being in the Constitutional Court, was that a very different experience for you than being in the High Court?
Yeah, it was very different, but I'm happy that I was in the High Court, because half of the things that came to the Constitutional Court I would not have understood properly. In the High Court, I worked with everyday things, from divorces to licenses to export lions to...
I hope you're a campaigner, a strong activist in terms of banning canned lions and blood lions.
There were many of those cases,
yeah.
Even license whether to transport lions across provincial boundaries and so on. So what I did learn there is the importance of the formalities, not all of them, but as an academic, if somebody says, what about the pleadings or what about the cost order, I would have thought that's irrelevant detail. It's extremely important. For many litigants, the cost order is the main thing. Firstly, because it can ruin you financially. But secondly, for some people, it has become a kind of a seal, a stamp that you won or lost. And that's an unfortunate part. For example, in family battles, father and mother fighting about children. I've had many of those cases in the urgent court. It happens, they come on a Friday afternoon. Father makes an affidavit saying very bad things about mother, about the condition of the child. He's not healthy, his clothes are too small, he hasn't been taken to the dentist. Mother is a striptease dancer, and he hears that the child sleeps under the bar counter while she's dancing. So as a judge, you feel you want to get into your car and fetch the child. But the job would have been easy if the other side did not have an opportunity to respond. And our legal system is based on hear both sides. So this is now a day or 2 before the school starts. That's normally when it happens. So father doesn't want to give the child back. Then wait for mother's affidavit. And she would say how father is always drunk and how he pushed her and the child out of the car once, and how his father would watch pornography on the TV and the child sitting next to him. And in the end, you feel like you want to go and take the child away from both. I once called a child, they fetched a child once, a 12-year-old child, to my office. Mother and father were sticking out their tongues to each other in court and making faces. I asked the child, she said she wanted to be with the father. I looked at everything. The order was that she goes to the mother. She started screaming in the foyer of the court. 3 days later, the advocates who appeared, one of them saw me in that same court and said, oh, by the way, she kept the child only 3 days and then she sent the child back to them. Now, do you know how much money at that stage have gone into the pockets of the lawyers, rather than to proper food and medical care for the child?
Yes, so it's always about humans abusing their positions, I think, and their power. But Judge, we're at the end of this interview. We're coming back for another one. Yeah. I just want you to close very quickly for me with a parting thought on this, where you are right now.
Well, this may sound quite conservative, but I would like to say to all of us that change is inevitable everywhere in the world. Change, you can call it transformation. It is inevitable, it happens all the time. In South Africa, change should happen very quickly. And it is naive to think that it happened once and now it is over. It will keep happening.
It's a process, right?
It is a process. People, whether we are a democracy on paper, we are a democracy as far as our institutions are concerned, but people are still poor and many people are still angry. So all of us, Muslim people, Christian people, have certain beliefs. All of us, in a way, are minorities. Every individual is a minority, and I think one must really try to be part of the whole rather than build fences around yourself and try to protect the little branch that you sit on, because that's not going to help if the whole tree is chopped off. So I think we must all try to become part of the larger ongoing transformation in our democracy.
Thank you very much, Judge. We're going to leave that, but we're coming back with another interview. We'll see you next week. Fi amanillah. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
قسما بالله رب العالمين ما ارتضينا غير دين الله دين فهو دين الحق دين الأنبياء إنه الإسلام نور وضياء.
هذا الدر وهذه الكلم بمديح الهادي تنتظم ضاءت بالمختار ظلم وحلا في موت